on the budget, and this is the continuing discussion that we've had, and council members received some more information on the table tonight that some resulted from questions that folks had asked about certain items. So we'll begin by turning it over to Mr. Nelson for continuing our discussion.
Just Mayor and members of the council, just go through briefly some of the additional information that we've developed. I'm sorry it took so long to put some of this information together. It was kind of the last minute rush of trying to get things together and try to come up with items that might reduce some of the deficit. As it's stated in the memo from myself to all of you, we got some new valuation totals. They're just about completed, and it appears that Troy could lose an additional $100 million in taxable value. That total computes to a reduction of about $600,000 in revenue, or a projected general fund property tax revenue total of about $33,500,000. That's down equivalent from what it was last year. The $600,000 total added to the previous budget shortfall of $1.474 million now gives you a total shortfall in the general fund of $2.074 million. We took several factors into consideration and trying to make sure that we hit your priorities as well as maintaining service levels as best we could. We provided somewhat of a breakdown or plan that you could consider that would erase the deficit for the next the coming fiscal year. Those items included utilization of some of the budget stabilization funds of $250,000. A combination of layoffs and early retirement incentive for employees, total of $1.521 billion. And then there were some others on the list of revenue enhancements that we have not received council action yet that we put on there. If you choose to implement those, that would take care of the deficit. If not, we'll have to come up with some other means to meet that. I believe it's a little over $200,000. We tried to stay away from taking money from the community organizations, and we tried also to stay within your council adopted policies of maintaining between a 10 and 17% general fund expenditure total for cash balance. If you have any questions, be happy to try to answer those.
Councilwoman Broomfield?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Nelson, please.
Take $250,000 out of the stabilization fund. What's left in there?
It's got a $2.1 million balance. If you take that away, it leaves you with $1.85 million.
Mayor Pro Tem Howard?
Two questions. One is the taxable value numbers that you mentioned here. I presume that's going to affect the following year, the 2010, 2011 budget too. And
Yes, sir.
we were looking at a big number for that year, even with what we do now.
Right.
Where are we with that year, roughly? I know it's kind of far off.
Roughly, you're probably going to be looking at a 5 to 5.5 million.
Yeah, we're still in that 5-6 million range.
Yes.
And the second question I had was, do we look into the using some of our community development block grant funds for the community groups so we can free up some of our general fund budget?
Yes, we had looked at that earlier, and the answer was no. Those types of funds cannot be used for those programs unless you identify a specific person and a specific program they're going to be into. They would not allow us to take those funds and budget them for a program per se. They have to be specific to people and a specific situation. And so that funding would not be available.
So is that the way the county does it or the state does it?
That's the requirements that come along with the funding.
Because the federal funding doesn't require that, so I'm curious as to whether or not that's, because the grantee, I think, is either the state or the county, and we're, my understanding is a sub-grantee on that, isn't that correct?
the county runs the program for those funds, and that's where we gather our information from. The information that was transferred to us, our understanding was that came from HUD,
Okay.
their regulations.
Councilwoman Beltrame?
Given that information, though, it would seem to me that the funds that, if there's enough money in our pot, so to speak, the funds that youth assistance uses for camp building skills and those sorts of things might be eligible, because those families might fall under the guidelines, but there's no guarantee that in any given year that would happen. So the portion of the TYA budget that is that might, but it's less than, I think, $2,000. But since we're having to find money a nickel at a time, it might be worth at least looking into. And while I have the floor, Madam, please.
Yes.
I noticed that we received a memo from Dave Roberts and Phil Nelson that talks about the business occupancy permits, and that being implemented, I don't see specifically on this list from today. Was it already on some other list as a,
No.
going to do it, or you want us to discuss it?
Any of those items that are remaining on the list were open for discussion. What we tried to do is come as close to possible with just these enhancements of doing away with the deficit.
$40,000 to $50,000 at $100 a throw. I think we ought to consider it.
We had not concluded some of those items that were on the sheet when we were talking before, and so we have those with us. You want to go to those sections first and then go back to
Well,
those
yeah,
other items?
because I'm thinking
Okay.
that, you know, $40,000 to $50,000 is half a salary.
Right,
So
Yes.
when you look at it that way, if we can balance the budget with some of these revenue enhancements, instead of saying to people that we want them to go home.
well, I'm in total agreement that we should look at any and all items that do not impact laying off staff, because at the last meeting I mentioned that over the years we have been cutting back. We've done things through attrition, retirements, and we reach a point where we can't expect staff to operate at their maximum capacity if they're doing a job of 2 people, and in some cases, the job of 3 people. And yet, we want to be efficient and effective, and we know that our residents expect us to deliver the services that they are used to having. So I think that looking at any of those is a good idea, and then we have to determine from there where we go.
Mayor?
Where, Councilwoman Beltrame, did you,
No, it was-
Councilwoman Broomfield?
The B. Looking for it, but off the top of my head. When I was reading through the background information on some of those suggestions on inspections, the thing that I'm concerned with is that we don't grow government and not put the revenue back in our pocket. In looking at some of the suggestions, we were adding fees to things we're already doing. So it wasn't additional work, and it would be revenue. But if we're tagging along more work with that fee, then it comes down to a real clear wash. If we're creating more inspections, regardless of what they are, business, whatever, now somebody has to go out and do that. And that costs time, that costs money. And I saw no business plan, if I can use that phrase, to show me if we do this, it's going to, we can make this much money and current staff can cover it. Well, okay, current staff can cover it. That means they're not doing anything right now? because they still have to do their job, and we're adding more work to their load. And so, if you're gonna make $100 to do this, how much is it costing for city time? Is it costing $75 for city time to do that? Well, then you've got a $25 revenue, and now we've made it harder, or we've grown more government, more regulations, more inspections. I would really be cautious myself, I can't talk tonight, to make sure that we are balancing it out on both ways.
Madam Mayor, may I say?
Yes, Councilman Beltran?
I understand the point, and I, in many ways I concur. This fee, I'm really pretty adamant about, because it gives us insight into what people have done to a building, so that when our volunteer firefighters and our professional firefighters, or paid firefighters, they're all professionals, go in to rescue or fight a fire, they don't find a wall that they didn't know was there. And they don't get locked in a corner. And if, as a business takes over a building, there's an inspection, it also streamlines other inspections, because then you don't have people coming back and saying, but they said, and oh, I could, and what's this other thing? So, and we all get enough of the calls from the repercussions of that. So I'm pretty adamant about this $45,000.
And the other thing is, when we discussed it before, we talked about the fact that it was a safety concern, and that even though it is a revenue source, it really is a safety concern, is the major reason for the suggestion. I don't think it would have been suggested at all if it wasn't something that they didn't feel was going to be a benefit to the community. Councilman Curley?
Well, it was the same thing. I'm just looking at the conclusion from the memorandum, and that's where he really sums it up. And he says, one, it will help alleviate potential hazards. That's your safety concern,
Right.
Madam Mayor. And then, again, three, avoids costly after-the-fact remedies. And that's what the chief had experienced and had been seeing. And so it really addresses a lot of the things that we encourage. Safety, streamlining, and also provides that revenue enhancement in a customer-friendly manner. So I too support it, and am pleased to see the background on it. I think that maybe for Councilmember Broomfield, if her question could be addressed regarding, would this be another staff, or would it be layer on layer, maybe that would be helpful.
Who wants to address that? Chief?
Currently, we are doing many of those inspections now. Our people go out, and if we know a building has been mothballed for a period of time, we keep an eye on it. When we're on that street, we look at it. When we start to see activity there, we stop. So we're already doing that inspection now. We're just not getting any revenue for it. And everybody's paying, in essence, to have us inspect that one building. Or, last year we found probably at least 30 or 40 that had some, and what happens is these people come to City Hall, and they'll go to planning, they'll go to building, and they'll say, I want to do this. Well, according to their rules, there's no problem. They don't always get to us to ask about it. So when we find out about it, and they say, well, gee, City Hall said we could do that. Well, okay, but you can do it if you meet all these requirements. Well, we didn't even know about those requirements, they even existed. So now we have somebody that's already moved into the building. They've already set up operations, and now we come in and enforce the fire code that's been in effect all the time that they just were unaware of, which really costs them more, because they have to go in and do things to that building after the fact, over the top of their existing operation that's running at the time. It'd be much cleaner to have them come here, get the occupancy permit, we go through everything, they make the changes that are required, and then they move in. And everybody knows what the rules are up front.
So this piece has been left out in the process. It really isn't about generating money as much as it's a communication problem between new businesses coming in and going into the building.
We had proposed this, we discussed this for probably at least 5 to 8 years that I'm aware of, because the problem just keeps occurring.
And these are new businesses coming in, and this piece is not just, it's not in the sheet that they have to follow.
Right, because the fire requirements are so broad and they're so specific in areas that there's no way that we can summarize what you have to do on a one-page. I mean, if you want to buy the 450-page code book and look at it yourself, you can probably figure it out sooner or later. It's just a lot easier to come to us and have us explain it.
Mhm.
And this is a one-time shot, it's not a recurring permit, it's the
Because
first
you were
time you
talking
come to
about
town.
earlier about doing once a year, once every
Yeah,
other
and we
year.
looked at that and said, hey, that's just a make-work project. I mean, what
Yeah,
we need to do is
that's
get
what I thought.
the first approach, when they come into town, we get them, and now, if they're here for 10 years, well, we follow up on those periodically anyway, but there's just no incentive for them to come to us and tell us that they're coming to town
Gotcha.
without some type of an ordinance like this.
One more question.
And then it would be added to the check sheet, you know, that they have to stop in and get all that set before they go on. Yes, go ahead.
Chief Nelson, how often do you check current businesses? You know how you go around and check the fire, is there a,
There are priorities based on usage. Typically, we check public assembly buildings on an annual basis, because there's a larger potential for life loss there. From there, we move to hazardous materials buildings that have permits for hazardous materials. We move to mercantiles. There are some small offices and things like that that we may not get to for 10 years because they're lower on the priority. We just don't have enough people to do every building every year, which is what many fire departments purport to try to do, but it's very difficult with the number of businesses we have.
okay,
You
but
just
it's
can't
not
do
like
it.
a, yeah. Good.
But restaurants, you know,
Yeah.
those places get done annually because of the potential for life loss. Those are higher priority.
Thank you.
Councilman Eisenbacher?
I have concerns with this relative to the approach. Basically, we're assuming there's a violation without any basis for it at the start. Anyone that does a building permit, my understanding, and I recently went through that process with the office, my day job, we moved offices, and I was very impressed with the intercommunication between the departments, because even before we moved in, the assessing department called me to confirm our address. And to confirm the contact so they could get our assessment at the end of the year. Anyone that's pulling a building permit, I have a concern about putting a new regulation in place instead of just making sure that the communication always covers the fire department and automatically routing it to the fire department anytime there's a change through our software systems that we put in place and through our management systems, especially with the consolidation of the building department into a single unit, or the building functions into a single unit. Anyone that's modifying, it's already flagged. And I agree, if you're modifying the building, there has to be a fire inspection. But for a small company to be moving into a new space on a temporary basis without any modifications to the structure, without any changes, we're assuming they're in violation, and we're making them pay a fee to verify that they're not in violation.
Mayor,
Further, Mr. Nelson?
could Mr. Steinmeck respond?
Mr. Steinbeck?
Yeah, if I may, a lot of the things that Chief Nelson has been referring to and some of the problems that we've encountered over the years are for work that doesn't require a permit. Open warehouse building that was used for a manufacturing plant, now they're going to do warehousing. It's not a change of occupancy, they're not changing any walls, but they are putting in high pile storage. And it's not a building permit requirement, but it does cause changes to the fire sprinkler design. Now, and those are some of the things that, as the chief has said, has fallen through the cracks. Someone will contact our office, I'm taking over 123 Industrial Street, and I'm gonna move my warehousing facility in there, and we look at the records and the zoning and everything else, and we say, fine, they're all set. You don't need a new C of O, you don't need anything. However, their method of storage or the material that they're storing or how they're storing it or where they're storing it causes problems with the fire suppression system or with something else that then causes violations that don't require a permit. You bring up a point that there might be a way that we could work this into the building permit, if we're issuing a building permit and we're issuing a new certificate of occupancy as a result of that building permit, there may be a way to avoid this process. But for those businesses that are moving into the city that don't require any building permits, don't require any certificate of occupancy, they're falling through the cracks. And that's where we may look at picking this up.
It's my understanding that if you put a mezzanine or a second level of storage, that you have to get a permit.
That would be correct. But if I'm just doing rack storage, everything.
It's mounted to the floor?
Mounted on the floor, it goes 20 feet high in a 22-foot high warehouse building. The sprinkler system can't handle that.
Right, but you have to get a permit to put those racks in.
No,
Oh.
it's furniture.
The company I work for, we canceled racks because of the impact of the sprinkler systems, but, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, knowing that in advance, you might have known the impact to the sprinkler system and the cost
When we got
involved.
the permit for the racks, that's when we found out, but yeah,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Well,
Interesting.
is it a consensus of council that we'd like this to occur? I don't know, we haven't heard from everyone on this. Councilman Fleming, Councilman Mayor Pro Tem Harnack, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes.
Yes, Councilman Fleming?
Well, based on what's been shared tonight, I have a much better understanding of what we're attempting to do. And I really don't have an issue with it, providing the proposal says we're not adding additional staff, we're doing this with existing staff. And it's gonna make it a safer environment. I'm wondering if, how confident are we in the numbers? If the permit fee were $100, I don't know how many businesses are doing $100, but we're saying 464 were done in 2007, 2008. I have no idea what to project for 2009, 2010. I don't think any of us do. But $100 you think is reasonable. It's not a real burden on anyone. But there again, how do we know in the process that this doesn't fall through the cracks again? Well, if we say we're going to charge $100, how do we know it doesn't fall through the cracks?
The people are gonna move in without doing it?
Yes.
Well, because once we have an ordinance, number one, there's a legal requirement, and then we take that out to the chamber, we take it out and advertise it and make it part of our whole educational process and a welcoming process in the community so that people understand that there is a requirement to do it. And $100 basically covers our cost of doing it. It's not a moneymaker. Some of them take longer, some of them take less. It's basically an average.
But we're already doing it. We're already doing it as much as we've been able to figure.
Right.
To the extent-
We're doing it by looking around and suspicion, really.
So from a budget standpoint though, we could put some number in to project what it would be, even if it's half what we said, 2007, 2008. If it were 23,000, whatever, we could put a number in there, just for projection. What we don't want to do is create a burden on anyone, but we don't want to create an unsafe environment either, so. I understand what you're thinking, it's just not what we use. If we use half of it, we're probably safe.
Okay, were there,
I've got a question.
oh, yes. Mayor Pro Tem Harnack?
So how do you define who has to pay this fee?
The assessing department keeps track of new businesses, and that's where we got the numbers from. So basically, what we would do is if you were a business and you were moving into a new facility or another facility in Troy, you would come in and fill out the application and basically pay the fee with whatever information you require in order to be able to assess what you're doing.
What if my business has no personal property? if it's all leased. And the lessor's paying the property taxes.
The things we're gonna have to work out. No, I mean, same way we do it today if you have a fire protection permit or anything else. I mean, it's just a question of becoming aware of it. And I think most of that's gonna be more educational than it is from an enforcement standpoint.
I guess my bigger concern is, you have a lot of real estate businesses that are operating on the same address, and they might have 70 or 80 LLCs or corporations that they run. Do you want each one to pay permit? And if not, how do you make it fair?
It's it's whoever, I think it's a relatively small percentage. What we're concerned about are industrial buildings, commercial buildings and things like that. Office spaces can have 100 DBAs operating out of a one-person office.
Yeah.
That's not what we're focusing on. What we're focusing on is facilities and buildings. I mean, if they're in the top of Troy, we inspect that anyway. So, I mean, there may be some that we're gonna have to work out the rules for how we're gonna do it. I mean,
Now, what about somebody who's an attorney and they basically have an office in their study at their house, and they meet people on their site, so they don't really have an office per se, other than their house. Do you want to inspect
that
the house?
doesn't, single-family dwellings are beyond the purview of this.
Okay. A bigger concern, or I shouldn't say concern, but a potential problem is, this is one shot, and the onus is on the tenant more so than the landlord. You get a business in there, and 6 weeks after you inspect it, they decide to do something and don't notify you. At the very least, I would hope that we put something in there that mandates, that if they have a change in the way the facility is run, they notify the city. Because, if we have a purpose here to make sure that they're following the fire code, maybe there's some way we can write it in there that, there's a notification requirement, otherwise it kind of defeats the purpose,
Yeah.
Yes, Councilwoman Broomfield?
Another thought too, along the line of a lot of DBAs or LLCs, and that's not your main concern, is one of the things being put together. I don't know if you could, but some sort of perimeters on the size of the building per business. I mean, again, if you've got one real estate agent that happens to rent one office, and that's a business, but it would be such a small, I know that's not what you're concerned about, so perhaps something along the line of perimeters on the square footage.
I would anticipate what we'll do is look at what other cities that have implemented a similar program have done and not reinvent the wheel, and customize it to make it work with what our intent and your guidelines or your guidance is here. It'll come back to you as an ordinance anyways.
I think we need to know if we have a consensus on this item before we move to another one, so. Councilwoman Beltrame, do you want to?
My only thought is, rather than using 2007, 2008, I guess I'd be more prone to extrapolate 2008, 2009 numbers, because they'll probably be a little more conservative from what was required, yeah. Doesn't help my case any, but I'm gonna be accurate. Well, in some cases, it's a whole person, but I think it's important.
The rest of you feel comfortable with doing that with the 08, 09 figures? Okay, all right.
If I may-
Is there another one, Councilman Eisenbacher?
Just to clarify, as long as those three items that were pointed out by Councilman Howrach, where single family doesn't apply, multiple DBAs doing business as at a single
Right.
location
Yeah.
wouldn't apply, and then not for small businesses, micro businesses that Councilwoman Broomfield pointed out, within reason, of course. Obviously, if you're a micro business and you're doing something hazardous, that's different than a micro business that's office-based, using a single cube in in a, one of those flex office spaces.
And of course, if the fire department, when, as they say, if they spot
Yeah.
something, you know, and they have to do an inspection of it,
Right.
then they have to be charged.
With those, I will go along with it.
Okay, all right. Who wants to bring up another item from that list of things that we've had? Are we comfortable with the property damage auto crash fee and the surcharge and the traffic tickets and the auto injury accident recovery fee and the reduction of right-of-way mowing from 6 times to 3? These are all listed in the memo, the February 2nd memo? Okay, we're set with those. Were there any others for, oh, I'm sorry, Mayor Potahara?
Just a couple clarifications. Last night, I don't want to be accused of leading anybody on here, but I think these are too many fees. I'd rather just try one. I'm talking about the 3 property damage, surcharge on tickets, and auto injury recovery fee, because in addition, there's going to perhaps be an increase in the general tickets anyway for the memo that we received as part of this. And I'm not in favor of just deluging the whole series brand new fees. We're not even sure how they're going to work. But I think I'm in the minority of this. I just wanted to say that I'm not in favor of all 3 of these new fees. And then with respect to the item we just discussed, I'm personally not in favor of allocating or saying that I'm going to move forward with this because I have yet to see the ordinance. And in concept, I think it may be a manageable thing, but I just think it's way too premature for me to say that I'm comfortable with something that I can't see the intricacies of. So I just wanted to express those thoughts to you.
Okay, anybody else on those items? Are there items then that are on the, I'm looking at the January 28th, January 21st latest budget number memo, where it has the charts with the lime green boxing of them, and some of them we have more information attached, and some of those we have not made a decision on yet. The largest one in dollar figure seemed to be the one for the community agency contributions, and if that is not subtracted from the budget, then it would come out of, I think, Mr. Nelson, you indicated that could come out of the, with budget stabilization money and the others?
It
Yes,
could be, yes.
okay. Is everybody comfortable with that occurring? Councilman Eisenbacher?
I want to make sure we're not jumping around too much.
No, I know, I was just going, because
Okay.
that was a
We're gonna go
large
north,
item
okay.
that seemed to be looming out there, and I thought it might be easier if we just deal with that and then go on to some of these that seem to be smaller items. That was just my thinking there. You are going down the
Yeah,
line, and that's fine.
yeah, our
I
different
know.
approaches, you jump through the agenda, I read from
Remember,
start
I
to
read
finish.
the agenda, I go to the study items and the hot button items, then I go back and read everything else, so.
Because I do
I'll
have
get it all
concerns
done.
about the mowing if we're there.
Me too, but I decided that.
I don't want it to be written so that we're not gonna mow more than 3 times. If our maintenance group has people available and a lawnmower available, or if, I know this is jumping between jurisdictions of management, but like if our golf course isn't as busy and they can run the mowers in an area, run them. It's minimum 3, not maximum 3,
Well,
within our budget constraints.
If they see something where it's a site hazard problem, they'll cut it anyway. I mean, whether it's 3 times or 6 times, so those will get,
Yes.
definitely get cut, because
I
that
don't
again
want-
is a safety concern. But you're speaking of aesthetically, if they,
If the person is available, if we have, you get done with the project early, get the lawnmowers out, I mean, as available. Just minimum 3, not maximum 3, is the understanding.
Councilwoman Kerwin?
Well, just bearing in mind that we did decide not to hire all of those people who would have that extra time available. That was where the savings came from.
Right.
So I'm not sure that there would be people with time on their hands and a mower ready to go out and do that. That was a decision that we made, that we would go this way instead.
You still have the full-time equipment
You-
operators.
You have some full-time operators, but the seasonal staff that routinely cleaned all that stuff up are pretty much
Yes.
gone. So,
Well, I think it would
the
depend
3
on the
minimum
schedule.
would work.
Yeah.
I'm just
Right.
wondering, in honesty.
Likelihood is-
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay, Mr. Nelson?
I guess just for clarification, that's contract mowing, and if you're talking about
Mhm.
us
Oh.
picking up the slack, if the
Yeah.
contract goes for 6,
Contract was for 3.
I mean for 3.
If it's contract mowing and we have a site problem, how do we deal with it?
Site problem, we would take care of.
Yes, we
Okay.
go out on individual complaints
Right.
across the city, no matter if it's mowing, trash, sinkholes, those issues are emergency situations that we take care of on a daily basis.
Okay, so 3 contract.
Okay.
Okay, did you find any other ones on there?
Just utilize whatever you
Councilman Eismacher?
can. If we're going in order. What was RC then?
Requires council consideration.
Right.
The snow plowing. I thought we had a
We
consensus
just,
on that one.
we did.
We did.
Okay, okay, so these,
It says
I thought it was deleted.
It says delete. That was our decision.
five.
Right here.
Removal on overtime city
Oh,
property is.
I'm looking across wrong.
Okay.
2 lines up.
Yeah.
That one I have concern.
Read it.
The light snow plowing of subdivisions to straight time with minimum overtime, is that the one you're looking at?
Yes. I thought that was different from what we discussed. I thought we had said no to that.
Well, we had talked about the city hall and what have you. The city facility.
Yeah, that's a different one.
Right,
That's
okay.
that's down
Yeah.
This one we
two,
hadn't finished.
right.
so, yeah.
that's down 2 items from there. That's no snow removal on overtime on city property.
Right.
And you're speaking of the light snow plowing of subdivisions in straight time with minimum overtime.
Yes.
That's the one with the RC, and it's 30,000.
Because this is something that,
Of course, you know, we can't judge everything by this year.
right. Oh, yeah, we won't be snowing on the light snow year.
That's what we
or
said last
plowing
year.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not supposed to snow in tight budget years, you know?
Councilman Beltrame?
Again, I said it a month ago and I continue to say it. I think plowing snow is one of the things our citizens expect us to do with their tax dollars. And if we get a snowfall on Friday night, their kids still have to catch the bus on Monday morning. And they shouldn't have to stand in 3 feet of snow to do it. We are expected to plow snow.
Right, but we decided that.
No, we didn't decide on the subdivisions, it says consider doing it to straight time. I think we need to allow overtime for that.
Madam Mayor,
And
Yes, Councilman Fleming?
I recall that discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, and we agreed that we would plow, but there was a minimum amount, was it 4 inches, 5 inches, I forget.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Murphy?
Yeah.
4 inches, and we said that was a safety concern,
Right.
and that if it snowed 4 inches or more, we would clear the subdivision because it was a safety concern.
Mhm.
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
That's what we discussed.
That's what it is.
Delete.
So we delete. That changes
that
the
one-
RC to a delete.
Right. So that we adjusted it, okay. All right,
And we got rid of banquet.
Yeah. That's what Troy Days is, for discussion.
the reevaluate the Troy Days event, including size, location, duration, and purpose. I know that the committee did meet and talk about options that they could, come out with if, there were some adjustments needed, but again, we've got this year where we had the rain out, you know, so every year's
That's more expensive than
usual pattern here.
holding it. Well, also I saw in our meeting minutes on this agenda from our Ethnic Issues Advisory Board
Mhm.
that they are reconsidering their tent.
Right,
So
I guess,
that's the kind of feedback I think we need,
right.
people doing it more so.
I know,
Yes, Councilwoman
I know
Kerwin?
that we give, we give a lot of staff time. That's our majority of our cost.
Huge amount of staff.
That's the
Right,
cost.
because we're not doing any
Because we're not,
upfront money.
the money isn't, we no longer give money, do we? Cash, I mean, invest in cash, so it's really staff.
Yes. We
But that's money.
absorb a lot of the regular straight time, most of it's for overtime hours for police,
Right,
fire, and
right.
public work. We absorb regular time hours that people come and work on.
Right,
And I know they've added things which are fun and interesting, like the fireworks, but then, of course, it takes staff time.
those were sponsored, I remember,
That was, but we have
Yeah.
staff then.
oh yeah, sure. Well, do we want them to cut back on what they're doing with Troy Days? And then if they cut back, that would cut back on the amount of staff time that's involved.
We already cut back the budget this year, I believe. I thought they were already almost break even, not
Yeah,
assuming
again,
no
we
rain
cut
events,
back on
right?
budget. What I'm saying is, did you want them to cut back on activities that they do so that would cut back on staff time that is used? I don't know, we haven't, because it says discuss it. I'm just bringing it up.
One of the other points we discussed was more flex time instead of overtime. Like, if we have a Saturday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday event, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, city holiday to make up for it potentially. So basically, you'd be trading weekend work for weekday work. More,
That's a union issue.
I think it's a
That's
negotiated
contract
contract issue.
that's something we could propose
Is it something,
for fixed events, not for emergency events.
hmm?
I don't know if you want
Mr. Alvarado, what?
to, Peggy Sears.
Oh. We got Peggy back there,
Current
okay.
provisions are gonna prohibit changing from the overtime payment to flex schedule, if you will. And I'm not sure, quite frankly, even if the contracts provided that, who could better answer that, if it would adequately service what we need.
Okay.
The second part of that,
Right.
in addition to that, is that we do have a significant amount of work to be done in the park. And this event particularly, Monday, Tuesday, following the event.
Right.
So in this case, flex time
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily work.
Right, yeah. Councilman Beltrame?
I guess my next question is, if there was some downscaling of Troy Days, either in hours, in days, in number of tents or events, would that assist us with the overtime and the straight time that we're paying now, such that it brings a little back into the budget?
Yeah, because there is no dollar figure attached to
There
this
is
item,
no dollar, but if
so we
we're
don't
absorbing
know.
that straight
Right.
time, and there's a certain amount of overtime that must be paid, and yes, I think we charge Troy Days for as much of that as, given whatever they make that year, they can pay. But, again, if it means cutting back the city festival a little bit to maintain the level of service that we have in all of our departments for the rest of the year, I'm pretty much willing to consider that.
Councilman Brookfield? I know.
We won't sit together next.
It's because they're next to each other.
That's hard.
I was looking over you.
I'm inclined to agree with Councilwoman Beltramini in terms of looking at the potential of scaling it back for a number of reasons, not just this. I mean, it started out as a Troy Family Festival. And, you know, we've heard reports and had difficulties with a lot of people coming in from out of town, with the police and all of that. And maybe just the whole idea of rethinking and redefining, not getting rid of, but bringing it back down to not just manageable, but something for the city of Troy. It's gotten so big.
It's, there is,
Councilwoman?
there was a family festival.
Right.
Which is not this one.
Right, we've already
Yeah,
taken
this
that
is
one
just,
out.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
it's a family festival.
that was the family
Right.
festival, which was fun.
This started out.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah, now
50
it's,
or 60 years.
yeah.
I think it's an item that the committee could look
Yeah.
at least. I don't know if it's an item we can put a dollar figure with that'll help us with our budget things tonight, but because it's on our list here, we're talking about it,
Committee knows best.
okay?
Right.
I guess for clarification, are
Yes.
you talking about scaling back the tents, the rides, the,
I guess that's up to
I
the
think they have to come back with some recommendations.
I think the committee has to do, and I guess, if I may, Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Because I started this train on the track. My thought in that is, yes, there are a lot of expenses that the city simply absorbs. And so, my priority would be to look at those kinds of things first.
What is the highest?
And then have the Troy Days Committee discuss the fact and see which items they want to scale back. Yes, I
And quite
agree.
honestly, do we really need vendors from Livonia in our tent?
I'm not really following you. I mean, if they're paying for the tent.
Yeah. But that's where I am, is could that tent be smaller, one that we could readily rent, if it was just Troy family businesses instead of from all over the region? That's where I am.
Okay. All right.
Hopefully the tent pays for itself too.
Are there any other items that you want to bring up that either had more information or an RC by them at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
Councilwoman Beltramini?
And I hate to appear thick, but the fact of the matter is, I need Mr. Steinmack to kind of walk me through the single-family rental inspections, what that would do for us, and how it would work. And I guess in all of this, kind of like Councilman Howard, I am assuming that if we say go ahead and do these things, that the ordinances to implement them will be on the table at the same time or before we approve whatever budget is coming, so we know how it will work.
Right.
So, okay,
You want more clarification from his
yeah, I
20th
got the memo,
memo,
I read
right?
it multiple times.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, if I
Yes.
may. And I guess as with the business occupancy licensing, certainly the first part of the program is going to be an educational piece. We've got to get the word out to people who would be affected or by this inspection process. But it would be operated very similarly to our multiple family residential inspection, that on a biannual basis. Single-family detached residential units as well as duplexes that are offered for rent, whereby the occupant of the unit does not have control of the building. They would be required to do a biannual inspection. We would apply the provisions of the property maintenance code, same way we do with the multiple family residential inspections. And we would ensure that that unit meets the minimum standards for an occupiable house in the city. That deals with, working equipment, furnaces, water heaters, and such. It requires, for state law, it requires smoke detectors and other things that we would verify as part of that inspection. We would do so on an annual, or excuse me, a biannual basis, and then issue a certificate of compliance. That would be good for up to 2 years unless there was some complaint that we received that there was some issue or violation there that needed to be looked at.
And it's your thought that this would, in essence, pay the fee for some things that we aren't doing now and add about $25,000 to your budget, you think?
Actually, when the chart was originally done, we put a number in there of 25. After looking at what other communities are doing and charging for this, it's probably more like 75,000. It would be done with existing staff, certainly based on our current level of activity and inspections. We could do so without adding any additional staff, and the educational piece certainly would take a little effort beyond what we're doing currently.
Okay, thank you.
And at one point, I know you indicated that there are quite a few communities that are doing this.
Yes, there's a survey that we
Given a
provided
whole list,
with
right.
the list of the surrounding communities
Oh,
that
yeah,
have the
there it is.
program and what their fees are.
Right, it's on the back here.
Okay, so if we do both of these things, we found a whole person and part of another.
Gary,
Yes, that's good work. Councilman Fleming.
I have a concern with these numbers, and if I'm understanding this right, we'll be inspecting about 1,000 units a year.
We, based on the information that we don't have exact numbers, but based on the information that we can gather using similar data that we can gather, there's about 2,000 dwelling units that are non-owner occupied or rental dwelling units. If we do them on a biannual basis, it will be about 1,000 inspections per year.
And that's what it is, 1,000 inspections, $75 per inspection, 75,000 annually. To me, this is a ton of work, and $75 per inspection. Going back to a point that was raised earlier, if we already have the staff in place, then we're not going to add additional staff. What we're doing is creating another level of inspection, another level of government. We're passing the fees on to the owners of the apartments. They don't pay this, they pass it on to the people that are renting the apartments.
No, single family.
Or single, they pass it on to single family, they pass it on. If it's single family, whatever. The landlord's not going to absorb this, he's going to pass it on. And people are already strapped for cash. We're just adding another $75 onto someone that's having to rent a place here in Troy. And we're creating another level of government, more government, and passing it on to keep people busy. That's what I said, to keep people busy if we're not adding staff.
Well, if you look at the chart that indicates which cities are already doing this, every 2 years, we've got and how much they're charging. Berkeley, $200 every 2 years. Birmingham, $125 every 2 years. Ferndale, $65 every 2 years. Hazel Park, $200 every 2 years. Madison Heights, $90 every 2 years. Royal Oak, $100 every 2 years. And Warren, $125 every 2 years. They are doing a single-family residential inspection to make sure that the single-family homes are in compliance, and there aren't things that are going to be of concern for the people that are the rentals. Councilman Eisenbacher?
I am adamantly opposed to this one. I'm also adamantly opposed to the rental unit one, but we're required to do that by state law. I believe we all took an oath to the Constitution. And part of that Constitution is unreasonable search and seizures. And I think it should be abundantly clear that in America, with very rare exceptions, government officials cannot constitutionally enter a home without either residents' explicit approval or a valid search warrant. And if we pass an ordinance along these lines, in essence, it makes it so that it's easier for our inspectors to get into the property than it would be for a police officer. A police officer would have to go to a court, get a subpoena, say there's suspected drug activity, et cetera.
No, I wouldn't.
Well, you'd have to do, you don't have,
Managing property was something I did for a living, so.
but if it's not, if you don't have permission of the property owner and you don't have permission of the person living in there, you need to have a court order.
Well, on the memo, it says
And
the
this-
adoption of this program is permitted by PA
It's
408.
It's permitted, but it's not required. For multi-unit,
It's permitted, yeah.
multi-unit, I mean, we can go through the minutia of it and you can discuss it, and lawyers and judges will say it's allowed, but my simple reading of the Constitution, this is unconstitutional. And I took an oath to uphold that, and I don't agree with this. Unless either the property owner or the tenant requests it.
May.
Or there's,
Mrs. Malone?
Let me just clarify just something as well, because I don't want it to appear like we are violating the Constitution with our rental inspections. But what the ordinance provides for with the apartment inspection is that if you do not have the permission of the property owners, then a court order is required. So that is how we achieve that. I'm sure that something very similar would be put in place in the ordinance that would be presented to you if, in fact, that is the direction of council. But that, obviously, there are certain requirements, and we would need a court order unless it were an emergency situation and there were a danger to health or welfare, an immediate danger.
Mayor,
Mayor Pro Tem Howard?
I look at this list and I see a lot of really nice communities here that don't have a program or a fee. And they include Bloomfield Hills, Bloomfield Township, Farmington Hills, Novi, Orion Township, Plymouth, Rochester Hills, and Sterling Heights. And I don't know anybody here that would claim that those are backward cities or slums. Furthermore, I would also put forward that Ferndale, which does have quite a few rental single-family properties, has a $65 fee, and the City of Madison Heights has a $30 reinspection fee beyond the first reinspection. So those are certainly things to take into consideration. I also am very much opposed to implementing this. I think it's out of place when we're talking about the budget, especially when you have it's such a drastic policy change that it may very well be a good and healthy discussion, but I don't think that this is the appropriate place for it, especially when I sense that there's some consternation among certain members of council, myself included, with going forward with this. It should also be, it should not be said that if somebody is in violation of the building code or fire code, that they are scot-free because there's no inspection. There is, what you have with a landlord and a tenant, you have is a contractual issue. If that landlord is not maintaining that property per code, then that landlord is certainly liable for anything that should happen, or the tenant certainly has a right to report that landlord as well. Nobody forces me as a potential tenant to live in a particular piece of property. It is a choice that I freely enter. And it's my responsibility, and I'm just using myself as an example, it is the tenant's responsibility to do those investigations. And I don't think that this is a very good thing for us to begin, at least not in this time, and not within the confines of time that we were trying to do here with respect to plugging a hole in the budget. What I'm saying is, okay, if we can't come to consensus on this tonight, let's put this off to the shelf and discuss it another day, because we do need to get through with the these budget issues. Okay.
Yeah, and we're discussing it because it was on the list here.
Sure.
But, you know, we're gonna take a break at this time, because we haven't had one, and then we'll come back to doing other items. Yes,
Just
Councilman
one thing in
Phil?
response, when we started this, we did talk about we did instruct staff to look for revenue enhancements.
Mhm.
So
Right.
one of the reasons it's here is because we asked for that,
Right,
so.
that's why I said
I do
something.
understand that any new ordinance would require a great deal of thought, but it's important, I think, whether we get a consensus that this would be a direction we'd want to go or not.
Well, and before we break, I understand the philosophical concerns, absolutely. But when you sign a lease, you give the property owner the right to enter at any time, so this is not a surprise. But more importantly, to me, it's a safety issue. And while Wade said, well, it's $75 and it'll be put off on the tenant, as a tenant, it would be worth $3 a month to me to know that my apartment, my home, the house that I rented was safe and compliant, and the building department, when the tax assessor comes in for his inspection, whenever that may randomly be, is not gonna throw me out because something is not compliant, and that the fire department knows how everything works. Additionally, in some ways, not having this inspection puts this class of renters in a different position as those in a multiple family dwelling. And I do not believe that that is fair or equitable, or even reasonable. So, that's my thought.
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem Howard.
I do think that there's a potential though that could give individuals a false sense of security. I would disagree that just because you have an inspection means that the property is being maintained to code. What that means is when that inspector was there, that inspector made sure that property was up to code. The minute that inspector leaves, there's absolutely no way, that the city can guarantee that that property will be maintained. As a matter of fact, that inspector could leave and he could do all sorts of code violations and the city would have no way of knowing it. We live in a free society. There's no way of guaranteeing security without giving up our freedoms, and therefore, and as a matter of fact, it's completely impossible unless you have somebody, an inspector living in that premises. So I don't think we want to say that we can guarantee that it's being maintained.
I never did.
Well, I don't think it necessarily means that it is being maintained to code any better than a property that isn't inspected. And furthermore, as I mentioned the last time we discussed this, is that if you want to do this, then we should allow for private inspections. The city provides a list, says, okay, these inspectors are qualified and we certify them as being able to do this. We can do it, or you can pick one from this list.
Okay, you can mull that over while we take a break and come back. 5 minutes?